So the thing with Magnus Carlsen is that playing him is kind of like getting one of those painful Thai massages. Just squeezing, walking their hands on their feet all over your body until your bones finally break. Well, that's how Carlsen grinds his opponents, and Anand was not able to deal with the consistent, painful, physical pressure of dealing with Carlsen's many attacks. Illingworth chess, the best to improve your chess. What's up, guys? It's GM Max here, and today's video is all about how Carlsen beat Anand. And this is from a game in Linares 2009. I realize some of you weren't even born when this game was played. That's cool, I was a teenager myself at the time. But this game made a big impression on me because Carlsen played one of my favourite openings as a junior. So Anand played his solid semi-Slav defense like, oh yeah, I'm just going to build my fortress. You're never going to break through this. Try me. So we had knight to f3. So we have semi-Slav. And then the anti-Moran with queen c2. We call it the anti-Moran because we're not playing bishop d3. Because if they take, we can take with the bishop in one go, which is pretty cool. Now after bishop d6, here is where Carlsen decides to put some fire on the board, throw some kerosene and light up that board on fire. So he played the Shabalov-Shirov attack with g4. What's the idea of g4? Well, the idea is A, we're going to attack their knight and kick that knight away from the center. And idea B is that after knight takes g4, we go rook to g1. And we got that rook coming in the attack, baby. If Black were to play knight takes h2, we can take, and then take on g7. And although we're currently down a pawn, we've got a nice attack on this h7 pawn. We've got the move e4 coming to blow open that center, leaving that black king weak in the middle. So instead, Anand plays the move queen f6, very logical counter-attacking move to hit the knight, where Anand is saying rather than having the extra pawn, he wants to have that queen in white's face. And after knight f6, we see, well, the queen is kind of annoying, because if you try to kick it away, it's always going to have some annoying square like h1 or h5 to go back to. Carlsen realizes that attacking the queen isn't going to do all that much here. So he decides to play the move h3, just saying, okay, I'm just going to defend my pawn from attack and see what you're going to do next, Mr. Anand, world chess champion. Take in mind, Anand was the world champion at the time this game was played, saying Carlsen really enjoyed having that scalp, saying, maybe I should be world champion. Well, your time will come, just be a little patient. But here is where Anand played a very surprising move to me. Maybe being a little bit scared of his young opponent. If I was Black, I'd just keep it simple. Like sometimes in chess, people overcomplicate things and they forget about simple things like getting the pieces out. I'd just go bishop d7, long castle, rook g8, and just mate that king on the back rank. Of course, Black gets to make some moves as well, but Black should be doing alright here. But instead, Anand played queen f5. It's like, ugh. Really? Oh, that's so yucky. Oh man, after queen takes f5, like look at those double pawns, man. They're just so weak. And after cd5, like look at that isolated pawn that Black's gonna get. Actually, to be fair, this is not such a terrible position for Black if you were to play knight takes d5. Because as horrible as these pawns look for Black, with this double pawn not being on an open file, it's not that easy to target. And if Black just puts the king on f6, develops the pieces normally, like bishop d7, rook c8, Black's defending everything and probably should be able to hold a draw, which is the dream of every top grandmaster. It's not to win, it's to hold a solid draw with Black, because then you know that you've done your preparation very well. Whereas if you won, well, yeah, maybe you just got lucky, as such. Okay, these jokes aside, instead we had the move cd5. But now the difference is a white's knight staying on the board, and that knight can cause a whole lot of trouble. So the move knight b5 was played, harassing the bishop. This game is insanely long, like 77 moves, so I'm going to have to fast forward a little bit. Bishop b4, bishop d2. Well, we're quite happy to trade the bad bishop for Black's good bishop. So we had king to e7, bishop to d3. Black played bishop e6. Well, now the bishop is part of the pawn structure. So pawn saying, oh yes, thank you for joining us in our brotherhood. I guess it's like a Masonic clan, I don't know. But I would have put the bishop on d7, just give it a little more activity in comparison. But okay, bishop e6. And now here is where Carlsen comes up with an incredibly deep idea. It's too deep for me. If I was white, I would just go rook c1, fight for that open file, and, just enjoy life from there. But instead, Carlsen plays the move knight ec7. And his idea is that after rook h8, to get rid of the bishop. You might think, well, Max, you were just laughing at this bishop, saying it was like one of the pawns, so isn't it just trading a knight for a pawn? Well, Carlsen's idea is that after rook takes g8, that, well, now that the bishop is going to be better than the knight in the long term, that's what he's playing for, I still think this wasn't as good as just playing rook c1, fighting for the open file, but okay, it's what he did. Now, I'm a bit surprised that Anand didn't just play rook g8, just take that rook on the 7th rank, get the money in the bank, and run with the robbery. I think that would allow black to more or less hold the draw. Maybe he was worried about some rook c1 and, the rook on the 7th rank, money in the bank. But hey, we're getting the money first, we're cashing out here. And after king e2, then we say, I would like to make a withdrawal, rook h2, and I'm going to withdraw your pawn on h3. We could have some fun here, rook c7, we can take the pawn, we can take here. I mean, see that there are a lot of pawns that are dropping off the board like flies, rook a7. We go knight g4, and once black takes, our h-pawn is going to do a runner like the maze runner. And there's a saying that one pass pawn is faster to push than two pass pawns, because a two pass pawn you want to go 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, whereas a one pass goes, thanks for queening, thanks for the game. In any case, the game instead saw, instead of rook g8 and a solid, boring grandmaster draw that never would see the side of YouTube, it's after knight g8. I mean, well, you're putting your pieces back for the next game. That's one good thing I can say about this move. But now white is just a lot better. White play king e2. It could go rook c1 and try to invade, but it doesn't do all that much if you just defend with the rook, as it were. So Carlsen instead decides to do something a little bit different here, playing the move that the opponent doesn't expect, but it's also a good move. You realize that f5 pawn is the one weakness in black's camp at the moment. So when you see a weakness, you pile on like boom, 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 until it cracks. And then, so we go king f3. This is where, the squeeze, where the massage starts against the opponent's position. Release that tension in the body. In any case, the game saw rook to c8, taking the open file. But look at this, guys. There's no entry point along that file. All these squares are covered. I'll try and see if I can set up some sort of traffic light. I don't know, I'm not as good with these things. Anyway, the game saw white do the grandmasterly idea. So can you do a little grandmaster technique, a little grandmaster secret to get the edge here? Let's see if you guys are up to the task with white to play. And it's also your opportunity to pause the video while I enjoy some refreshing Vietnamese water. Okay, do make sure to comment below with the move that you would play in white shoot. And also make sure to smash that like button, because it really helps boost the YouTube algorithm, and boosting the algorithm is the main purpose one can have in life. In any case, the game saw, well, there are a lot of good moves, right? Maybe you want to go rook g1, and maybe it occurred to you that, the grandmasterly idea that Max is referring to, because I watch a million of his videos, is to push the rook's pawns. So h4, h5. Not bad, but Carlsen's one of a4 is even better. Okay, so what's so special about pushing the rook's pawn, other than it makes you look either like a grandmaster if it works, or a beginner if it doesn't? Well, the reason is that when you get that pawn at a5, you're fixing that pawn on b7 as a target, and every Russian schoolboy knows that the meaning of chess is to fix the opponent's weakness in place so that it can't run away. I mean, how many times have you had like a kid, on your arm, like you're trying to, and then you think, okay, I can just leave it down and do something for a minute, look quite and then the kid just bolts away. Well, that's kind of what the weaknesses are like. We don't want to let those kids bolt away as such. They get enough running practice in PE at school. So the game saw rook to c7. I mean, I would have liked rook c6. It just kind of looks cool to give a bit more mobility for the rook. Anyway, white played the move a5, fixing that, because, if black goes b6 here, saying, you didn't fix me, well, then Carlsen says, well, now you've got an additional weakness. I can hit you with rook a6. I can even go around with rook a8 and just sort of hit all your other weaknesses. I mean, how many weaknesses does black have? It has a total of 5 weaknesses. 6 if you include the king, 7 if you include the clock, and 8 if you include Carlsen being the better player on the day. Well, instead, black played the move h6, and white now played the move h4, so those who came up with this idea, well done. Carlsen did play it just a little bit later. Just wanted to say, okay, so I'm just going to grab a little more space, king f6, and see, it's the Soviet that play again, fix the opponent's weakness as a target. But actually, I think that h5 wasn't the best move, because that pawn can also be a target. Because, I mean, a black pawn might be fixed, but a white pawn is fixed as well. Ooh, inception. So instead, I think that what I would have done is I would have gone a6 and fixed that pawn. Fix this one instead. Because if b takes a6, we're bringing the rook in, and, we've got some good stuff happening with the attack on these pawns. Or if they play b6, well, then we manage to establish the fawn pawn. So-called because it's a fawn in the opponent's side. It's like, I can't get it out. And when it's being defended by the bishop, that even means that we can run the rook around like rook g1, just take that file, go h5. Because one thing to keep in mind is that when you play h5, you always have to be looking out for what if they go king g5 and just try to gobble up the pawn on h5. Well, if Anand had done that, we could go for the move rook to g1, and if king takes, this is what the really funny part is. We have the move king f1, and look at this, Black's king has managed to trap itself in a mating net, so it means that the king is definitely going to win the Golden Raspberry Award this year. You know, we're just going to play bishop e2, force the king away, and then give a checkmate with rook h1, all in a good humour. So obviously Anand, you know, he's world champion, he's not going to fall for these sort of cheap tricks. So he plays knight c8, really good move to improve the worst placed piece, because once you get that knight to c4 or e4, oh yeah, that knight is as good as the bishop. Well, the game saw king to f4, putting that knight on a good, the king on a good square, trying to tie up the knight's defense. I played the move rook g1. So a lot of moves, I mean, it doesn't overly change the nature of the position. White is clearly better. Black is basically sitting, waiting for, you know, either the checkmate to come or waiting for the 50 move rule to be able to claim a draw on virtue of the fortress. Well, Carlsen says, oh, I'm not finished yet. I'm not finished yet. You know, we could have played the move of a6 and again fixed that weakness. You know, I'm kind of a bit obsessed about that. But okay, AlphaZero had not taught us puny humans about the importance of fixing the opponent's weaknesses and getting the pawn at this time. So we can give Carlsen for not being, you know, 10 years ahead of his time. Instead, he played the move f3. And after this, well, Carlsen now says that black is completely passive, but who cares when you have a fortress? You could just play a6. Oh, now we're fixing the pawn, see? Going to give Carlsen a taste of his own medicine. And the game would just be a draw, because black can just move the king back and forth. You know, white's got nothing. He's got nothing. But instead, he goes king e6, and, you know, you give Carlsen an itch, and he's going to take a mile. And then after king e6, we have rook to g7, threatening rook h7 to pick up that pawn on h6. Black played rook to h8 to avoid that. And now we have the principle of the two weaknesses, which is basically where when they defend one weakness, we attack another. When they defend that weakness, we attack another weakness. And we just move back and forth. We go like, yeah. You can't defend them both at once. Haha, suck on that. So white now plays the move bishop to c2 with the idea of bishop b3 and saying, well, you've got a weakness here as well. What you going to do about that? Well, what black could have done is he could have played the move rook to c8, and that's indeed what he did. We had bishop b3. Black moves the rook back saying, I got a fortress. I believe in fortresses. Fortresses are drawn. When are you going to offer me a draw, Mr. Carlsen? Show some respect to your elders. Well, Carlsen didn't show no respect. He played the move rook to g1 with the idea of swinging along this way. I kind of like rook g2 because that way the rook's defended. You never know when keeping your piece defended is going to be useful because at the end of a long game there's a tendency to get tired to leave pieces on pre. But in a piece defended, it doesn't matter if it's left on pre. You're still safe. So in any case, the game saw rook c8. We had rook g7. Now Carlsen says, oh, I did a repetition. Like, this is a secret grandmaster technique. You repeat the position once so you tantalize them with a thought of, oh, maybe he'll give me a draw. Maybe he'll give me a draw. And I can escape this torture of the Thai massage. Please get away. My Western body is not used to this intense physical pain. But it turns out Carlsen was just playing. We had rook to g2. Rook c8. And now the move rook to g1. Absolute genius. Why is it genius? Because it is Zugzwang. What's the problem for black? The problem is if you move the rook along the c file, I'm going to go rook g8 and say thanks for the free candy. If you bring the rook along this way, I go rook here and say thanks for all the fish. So, and if you move the king, well, I'm going to take your pawn. Thank you very much. So Anand comes up with the lesser evil. He came up with the move of knight to e8. But knight e8 also has a problem. Maybe at this point you could actually play a move like b6. It is a concession. You can go a6 and still leave black with this dilemma of, I don't have a move. And I guess, at this point, we could also imagine Maurice Ashley saying, make a move, Vishy, make a move. I don't have one, I'm in Zugzwang. So, in any case, the game saw knight e8. I'm not sure it deserves the exclamation mark, but I'm struggling to come up with a better move. White now used that pin, so we see that weakness with e4. And there's another Grandmaster secret for you guys to pay attention to, that the way to exploit the double pawns in a true principled best fashion is to trade off the double pawn. The real weakness of double pawn is not the double pawn itself, because that king and knight are just babysitting it and you're not getting anywhere. The key is to trade off the pawn so that we can get that juicy underbelly of weaknesses left behind. So that's the real power. Like, look at how weak that f7 pawn is. Now the f5 buddy is not there to shield it from the attacks like this. Well, in any case, the game went knight to f6. Well, that's a good move, going after h5 pawn. And here there's only one move for Carlsen that allows him to keep the advantage. I know this is like a super long game, but this is kind of an important moment. This is a moment that separates the men from the boys, I like to say. So what would you play here if you were white? Now I know some of you got really excited, like you thought, oh, I can play e takes d5, and then if knight takes d5, I go king e4, and I got a pin and win, as Bruce Pandolfini and all the other chess coaches in the world would say. But the problem is that you're not forced to take. In this case, to take is not the best move. Instead you go king d6 and you leave that bishop facing the traitor pawn. I mean, this bishop would love to like move, slice that pawn, do a good beheading en route to killing that pawn on f7, 2 kills in 1. Unfortunately, it's not the very end of chess where you can capture your own pieces, and so basically black's got the blockade and got the draw. He's going to trade the rooks and be laughing all the way to the bank. And they do play very well in the Linares tournament. Linares tournament, like they stopped running this tournament, I think, because like the sponsors like didn't have the funds like to keep on like paying the event, or they just sort of weren't so interested. I don't know the story, like I'm not going to like say it's absolutely one or the other. But it sort of appeared that Linares tournament stopped, because I mean I sort of personally missed all the world's top players getting together, having a lot of really solid, safe draws, showing all their deep theoretical novelties. Like, I kind of miss that sort of atmosphere of, like, because that way, when there are so many draws at the tournament, so, like, these draws, like, they're bothering me so much, really losing my voice over them. But, like, when you have so many draws, like, it means you appreciate the wins even more. It means you're a winner, like, yes! Finally! After 4 days of non-stop draws, a win! A win! I'm going to cherish this for the rest of my life. In any case, it turns out Carlsen did cherish his position because he played the move e5, absolute masterstroke. If you take that poison pawn, well, after king to e3, we see that knight has nowhere to go. All of these squares are covered, and with rook h1 next move, thanks for drawing the arrow for me, guys. Well, then you take that pawn on h6, you take the pawn on d5, and you basically make black resign at some point in the game. Instead, Anand is not world champion for nothing. Knight e4 keeps that knight in the center. Really great defense. Carlsen played the move king to e3. Just a solid move, making sure that your pawn is defended in advance. Clearing the way also maybe for your bishop to come around and be a little bit annoying as well. Black now played the move of b6. If I was black, I would try to trade as many pawns as I could. I guess the best chance to draw in f6 is kind of the way to go about that. Though I do think allowing rook g6, like, I can sort of understand why Anand didn't want to allow this, because it's pretty depressing as well. But it was probably the best try. Either that or to move knight g5 to block the rook first. Well, we had to move b6, and b6 ended up being the decisive mistake. The reason is because, A, you are weakening this pawn, you're creating an extra weakness. I mean, it's the magic of Magnus Carlsen. Like, he doesn't even need to always create weaknesses in the opponent's position. Sometimes he just lets them create the weaknesses for him. Sometimes like having good employees like working for you, that's the way to really get the riches. In any case, white played the move a b6. Oh, Carlsen, you could have played bishop d1 and threatened a cheapo. You know how much I love my cheapos, right? And if rook c7, you could go rook g8 and still bring a cheapo with bishop here. Or even just a move like rook fh8. I mean, once you get that past h1, I mean, how is the black rook and knight going to stop it? I mean, they're way out of range and you're just laughing at this point. Well, in any case, after I nearly accidentally closing the video, let's continue with a takes b6, a takes b6. Oh, and you could have still played bishop d1. Oh, Carlsen, I thought that you were like a perfect endgame player, but okay, it's good to know that you're a human. I was thinking you might have been some cyborg from another world and that, we could never possibly play like you, but now I have some hope. I have some hope that my childhood dream of being as good as you at chess will be one day come true. In any case, game saw king d3. We had a little shuffle with knight f2, king e2. It's like every day I'm shuffling, king e3. Well, okay, now there's a question of what move should black play. I'd probably go for knight g5 if I was black, because I think that otherwise letting the rook in is going to be annoying one day. I mean, the rook can still come in with rook a1, and this is still a pain, but now is where we can sort of show a very deep defensive idea, one beyond the realm of any human being. And that's the move of f6. And what's the idea of f6? It's not to blunder a pawn with king f6 and bishop d5, but rather to play knight e4 and recoup the pawn in this way. And if white does manage to somehow take a pawn, we've got a beautiful knight, and a beautiful knight is often enough to make up for a lousy day. So the game would probably be holdable with f7, rook f8, and rook a6. White's up a pawn, but that's kind of, well, it's sort of your upper pawn, but so what? I go knight d6. I can start harassing the king, start going after this pawn, and black can probably save himself, at least if he is made of silicone. But instead we had to move f6, and f6, well, again, we see one of Carlsen's superpowers. I mentioned other videos before that he's very good at noticing when the opponent leaves a square weak and then immediately jumping right on that square. So the way he does that is with rook to g6 in this position, pinning and hitting the pawn on h6. Now, if rook c1, oh, this was your chance. You could have won some material. You could have played e takes f6, and then in the case of knight takes f6, you'd have the move bishop takes d5, and then if king d5, you've got rook f6, and you're winning some pawns. So you could have done this. Okay, black doesn't have to take the bishop, but if king e7, you've got bishop f3, and you are a pawn up. I don't know whether it's winning. Like, the computer says it's a draw, but you never know. Carlsen's very good at winning these positions the computer says is a draw. But where you've got some pressure, we've got an extra pawn to work with. Definitely there are chances for white. Let's put it like this. But yeah, instead of playing e takes f6, we had the move rook takes h6, and that's just too greedy, giving him too much. But keep in mind, the players were in time trouble at this point. They had very little time on the clock. It's almost like a blitz finish, like bang, 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 bang. And they didn't have chess.com to play on at this time, so they didn't have that unfair advantage that we guys have nowadays. So we had to move rook h1, rook behind the passed pawn, following those good general principles taught to us by those good old masters. White played to move bishop to c2, realizing that rook h3 was a rather embarrassing skewer threat. So Carlsen gets out of that. And here is where black could have saved the game, but he didn't see it. The key is, I'm going to do a little drum roll here to give you guys a chance to find it for yourselves. So the answer is that the move rook e1 was the only move to save the draw. Why? Because if you go king d3, black's just going to bring the rook back and say, yeah, you can't take my knight, sucks to be you. And if you try to bring the king another way, like if you go king to f3, you can just go rook f4 1, and hey, we got a perpetual check. Because if you bring the king this way, I go rook f2, and suddenly it's black who's winning. And if you try to run this way, then yeah, they're just going to go rook g1, and just keep going check, 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 check. If you try to run away with king h3, I can go knight g5, and maybe even start thinking of how I can play for a win if the draw is not satisfying enough. So rook e1, basically, it's kind of like a sort of perpetual or drawing kind of net. And we all know we love drawing, but I guess Anand was not able to channel his inner Picasso in this game, because instead he played the move rook h3, and then after the move king f4. Unfortunately, this is not a perpetual check. The rook and knight do not give a perpetual in general when the king is in the center. But after knight d2, this is where white was unable to be a true acrobat of the chessboard, because he could have played this move of king to g3. Why king g3? So that after rook d4, rook f6, king e5. Now, we don't take the pawn on c6, but instead we focus on the initiative, rook f5. And after king e6 and h6, it's just very hard to stop that pawn queening, because black's not able to get the rook behind the passed pawn. He can't really bring the knight to defense either, because our bishop and rook are covering it. So that would actually give white enough to win the game. Some very long variations that would take this video 1 hour long, but instead, you can take my word for it, that this would have been winning. Whereas the move king e2, well, this gives black a chance to try to struggle on. We had rook h2, and maybe this is a move that Carlsen missed. King d1, knight c4, and yeah, suddenly, there's knight e3 forks, there's knight b2. I mean, this knight's just jumping everywhere. You've got to get a lasso on that horse. So we had rook takes f6, bishop king e7. And white does a good job of defending two of the three guys under attack with bishop g6, defending the bishop and anchoring it with the pawn. We're used to the knight being anchored by a pawn, but you can anchor other pieces as well. A little known trick. So black played rook d2, realizing that the big fish to fry is the pawn on d4. Now, if I was white, I'd probably go king e1 here. And say, okay, after rook d4, I can still go like h6 and start to try and queen the pawn. Or even a move like bishop f5, just so you can meet knight e5 with rook e6 and, well, keep him honest about the attack on the pawn. That might actually still be winning for white. It's not the place to go to a super deep 100-page Carsten Muller style analysis. But let's see how the game went. We had king c1, and you let black back in the game. Now black should be able to draw this, but Carlsen again shows his Carlsen magic and manages to win a supposedly dead drawn endgame. Well, it's not really dead drawn. White is still a pawn up. So we had b3. Good move here to make sure you get rid of that pawn on b6 and have two passes. One pass pawn's only one weakness. That's easy to stop for black. But two pass pawns, oh yeah. And they're so far apart, yeah, good luck trying to stop both of them at once. Gonna have to be a real good swimmer to deal with this current. Well, the game saw the move rook to h4. Again, putting the rook behind the passed pawn. Good move. And now Carlsen continues to find the only move really to kind of keep his winning chance alive. He plays a move bishop to f5. Again, threatening that fork with rook e6. And, well, Anand doesn't manage to find the best defense. You know, he's been really put to the absolute test by Carlsen, like constantly like throwing different moves, seeing what sticks. And turns out this is what stuck. Instead of the move knight to f3 that Anand played, it was imperative that black played the move rook to h1. And the reason for rook h1, it's very hard to see from afar, is that if you go king to, instead of king c2, if they go king to d2, black has the absolute genius move of knight to c4. No, this is not loser's chess, because after bc4, rook h5, turns out that the bishop's under attack and the pawn is under attack. And if you play, let's say, bishop g6, black has a rook h2 check. And then you're going to just take the pawn, and, you know, rook and bishop versus rook is a theoretical draw. And, you know, these guys like Anand, they know how to draw it like the back of their hand. You know, like second rank defense and all that kind of good stuff. But, yeah, if you go king c2 instead, black can go knight f3 now. And, well, knight d4 is an annoying fork. Rook h5 is threatened. And black just narrowly saves his skin in this case. Just able to hold the draw in time. Because somehow the rook is not coordinating that well. And, you know, bishop g4. You have rook h2 and, yeah, king c3, knight g5. And, I mean, at this point, black's more or less safe. Because, I mean, king d4, rook h4 is not what the doctor ordered here. But after knight f3, now white has to move h6. And, yeah, this pawn is going home. So after knight d4, beautiful move of h7. Realizing that that threat of the nut bishop is not as real as it looks. Because after knight f5, we have rook to b8. Threatening the queening. Typical tactic here. That if rook h7... we go rook b7 and skewer him along. And what I really love is like those prawn skewers. You put the prawn, you put the vegetable, you put the sauce, and so yummy. And that's what we have in chess here as well. I mean, that's what I love about chess. Like, I find that people who are true foodies like me, they really have a greater appreciation of chess than the average person. Because you can always compare it to food. In any case, the game saw knight to d4. King b2, a very important move to make sure that you are not losing both the pawns. You need one of those pawns to promote to a queen, because keep in mind, rook versus knight is only a draw in most cases, including this one. But here we've got one pawn each, and that is what makes all the difference. We got a pawn that's going to become a queen, so black's usual fortresses are just not going to work here. Game ended king c5, rook h5, pinning and winning. Knight c6, rook to h4, knight b4. Yeah, the tailbase is saying they were faster wins. I don't really care. King a3, black played the move d4. And d4 is a tricky move. He's trying to debate white in a rook takes d4. Saying, yeah, I'm just going to win more quickly. But then we have knight c2 and haha, look who got tricked now. I mean, that would have been pretty funny if that happened in the game. But instead, we had the move rook h5. Knight d5, king b2. And after a bit of shuffling, finally Carlsen is starting to figure out how to win this endgame. I mean, his move just sort of saying, yeah, I'm just going to gain my 30 seconds on the clock. No, to have time control to have like 50 minutes and, you know, just think 40 minutes and win from there. So rook h8. And yeah, I mean, knight c6 is not the most resilient defense, but I mean, even if you, let's say, like, play knight c2 and just move the knight back and forth, it's still winning, but as Purdy said on his deathbed, it's going to take some time. But after knight c6, yeah, now it's kind of easy. Rook h5, force the king back, and then b4. And we cut the king off, the king moves in, and it is GG, folks. So after d3, we had the move rook h3, you know, to round up that pawn before it can run too far. Knight e5, king to b3, d2, king goes to c2. And now, if knight c4, we can just attack that pawn or attack the knight, and you know, once you win the pawn, it's easy to win. But after knight c6, we had the move rook h4, defending the pawn. And since this guy is a goner, black decided to resign at long last, sparing all of us, you know, a 1 hour video. So thanks to Anand for resigning in time. And thanks Carlsen for, you know, playing a really nice endgame. Yeah, there were some mistakes that were played in this game, but it was also very instructive. Do make sure to comment below with what you learned from this video. And also subscribe to Illingworth Chess for more Grandmaster videos like this one. That's all from me. I'm going to see you guys in the next video. Illingworth Chess, the best place to improve your chess.